He did the mash.
He did the monster mash.
The monster mash.
Hey everybody, it's me, Peter, and I am a huge movie buff. And as a huge movie buff, something that I hear really often is, I don't like horror films. Now this one's a little bit tricky, because people dislike horror films for different reasons. A lot of people don't like horror films because they don't like the gore. Some people don't like horror films because they don't get scared by horror films, so they can't really take them seriously. They find them cheesy, they find them corny. And some people don't like horror films because they don't like to be scared. So I'm going to do something a little bit different for this episode. Since the reasons for why people dislike horror films are so diverse, I'm going to have multiple picks. So first, let me get out of the way real quick. People who don't like to be scared. This one is a little bit on the tricky side, because if you don't like to be scared, then you're not going to want to watch a horror film. But if you watch a horror film and it doesn't scare you, then it's not very good at being a horror film. So I would have to pick a horror film that is kind of sort of disguised as something else. You know, while Jaws and Jurassic Park did actually come to mind because they have horror elements in them, they're not quite horror films. Their tones are more similar to Raiders of the Lost Ark than they are to some of the classic horror movies. And even if you look them up on IMDb, their genre is literally laid out as adventure thriller. But the film that I did pick is in fact a horror film. When you think about it, you might think of it as an action film because of its sequels, but it's a horror movie, it has horror elements, it has a horror tone, and the reason for why I would pick this particular movie for somebody who doesn't like to be scared is because of the environment. The movie I'm talking about is the 1979 Ridley Scott film Alien, starring Sigourney Weaver. Alien is a horror movie, and it will have parts that scare you or startle you, but because of the sci-fi surroundings, because it's on a spaceship, that environment is pretty foreign to us. You might be scared in the moment, but once you leave the movie, it's done. It doesn't stick with you. You're not dwelling on it. You don't feel like somebody's watching you, and you're not worried that you're going to get attacked by aliens. And so, if you don't like being scared during horror movies, then I suggest watching Alien. Now moving on, I would like to talk about horror movies for people who don't like gore. Now there are some slasher films that do a pretty good job of avoiding gore, but because of the subject matter and because of the way that it's shot, it kind of tricks you into thinking that you just saw something really bloody. And for that reason I would exclude something like Halloween. For the most part I'm going to try and avoid slashers and also body horror. Body horror movies are, in my opinion, the most disgusting in the genre. Even more so than the torture flicks like Hostel, movies like The Fly are terribly disgusting and you definitely do not want to be eating when you watch these movies. Really anything by David Cronenberg. Just don't eat when you're watching a David Cronenberg film. But there's still a wide range of horror films that you can choose from. There are a lot of ghost movies that can still kind of creep you out without any gore. There are some alien movies that'll freak you out. What you're really looking at is psychological horror films. Films that are scary because of what it implies. Not what's shown to you, but what you're thinking about when you see it. A good example of this would be films like The Babadook. Or, before the sequels totally ruined them, The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. And while, in my opinion, Psycho is probably the best of Alfred Hitchcock's movies, The Birds came to mind. The Birds is one of those rare horror films where all of the scary parts take place in broad daylight and still kind of creep you out. But I have had more than one exchange with somebody who's told me that they didn't like The Birds, they thought that it was lame because birds aren't scary. So while I think that The Birds is fantastic, and while I think it's really scary, I'm gonna have to pick something else. But I am really satisfied with the movie that I settled on. If you want to watch a movie that's really gonna scare you but doesn't have any gore in it, then watch Wait Until Dark. Wait Until Dark is a 1967 Terrence Young film written by Robert Carrington and Jane Howard Hammerstein, starring Audrey Hepburn and Alan Arkin. Alan Arkin is more well known for his comedies, so this is probably the only movie that you'll ever see him in where he plays a villain, and he is chilling. 3 criminals look for some drugs that are stowed away in an apartment, and Audrey Hepburn, a blind girl, is the woman who lives in that apartment. And so alone and in the dark, she's left to fend off these criminals. This is one of those movies that you hear stories about, where people were waiting in line outside of the theater, and then they hear everybody in the theater scream, and then 10 minutes later, everybody leaves the theater. So they go into the movie not knowing much about it other than they are going to get scared at some point in the last 10 minutes of the film. As a horror film, this movie really doesn't disappoint. Audrey Hepburn is always enjoyable to watch, and Alan Arkin does a performance that will stick with you. So if you want to watch a horror movie but you don't like gore, then watch Wait Until Dark, and then get back to me in the comments and let me know what you thought. If there's a type of movie that you or someone you know doesn't usually like, then let me know and I'll see if I can change your mind. I'll be posting part 2 to this video shortly. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.